Get started. The time is 8:51, and we are reconvened in open session. We'll first consider action on our closed session items.
Madam President, I have several actions to take.
Yes, ma'am. Start one at a time for us, please.
I move that the Board of Trustees adopt a resolution declaring a program change, reorganization of the Special Education Department.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Hellinger and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Mr. George? No. Okay, so this is a resolution, so do we have any discussion?
Dr. Hill is here and will be happy to present just a few talking points on this item if you'd like her to do that.
I think that would be great to give us sort of an overview of what the total plan looks like, and then we understand you'll be coming back to us next week with the new position, so you could maybe then prepare a couple of slides or something. We can look forward to that. But yes, if you could give just a little bit of a overview.
Okay. Well, good evening. Thank you. Well, as you recall, it's been, I think it was back in May of 2015 when Dr. Garcia first reported out to the board the results or a report about special education, and it was basically a program review that incorporated members of the community, parent advisory groups, teachers and administrators, and gathered all that input over the whole year between 2014 and 2015, summarized that in a report, and made recommendations to utilize that as a strategic plan recommendations going forward. When I started in June, I was asked to utilize that because there had been a lot of time and work in that plan, and so we worked through that plan all this year. I met back with the board in February and gave you an update of that. And one of the goals, the main goals, there were 9 goals that we talked about in that plan, and one of the goals, goal 8, was all about accountability and looking at personnel, and are we using and utilizing our personnel in the way that we need to meet the needs of our students and our community. And so as part of that, we were asked to really look closely at the positions, to look at, are they being used efficiently and effectively? Are people, do they really have a clear understanding of their role? So meaning, are the job descriptions written in a way so that we understand that? And overall, is it meeting the needs of the students? So as a result of that review this year and looking at and gathering all that data, we believed it would be in the best interests of our students and our schools and our community to reorganize and have a program change to come up with a more concise way for our job descriptions and our positions to serve our students. So as a result, we have proposed this RIF and this elimination of these positions, but we are coming back to you in the very near future with some new positions, and it's actually 13 different positions, and there are some, several of them, like one of them may have 4 positions, but 13 actual job descriptions and categories of positions that we believe will be more targeted and designed to serve the population of students that they're going to be working with. And so we believe that that's a way that we can meet the needs of the community. I think we've heard a lot from the board and from our families and actually our campus staff about really having high expectations of how we as a central office support them. And so, this is the main reason for that proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. That's very informative. So we'll look forward to hearing more about that next week and specifically what you're targeting and what you're looking for. And then maybe I was thinking too about the accountability piece that you talked about, like how we'll know we're making progress and what kind of your strategies are around that. So okay. That'd be really great. So does anybody have any other questions or comments for Dr. Hill?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have a motion on the floor from Ms. Hellinger and a second by Mr. Rice. Is there any other discussion? So then all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Ms. Hollinger?
Yes. I move to declare a program change of reorganization of the Special Education Department, which requires a reduction in force in accordance with policy DFFB local.
Second.
A motion by Ms. Hollinger and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Ms. Hollinger?
I move to accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the following employment areas to be affected by the reduction in force: coordinator, special education; facilitator, special education; facilitator, behavior, special education; teacher, special education; and teacher, employment specialist, special education.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Hollinger and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
So in accordance with the motion that we just passed, I also move to accept the superintendent's recommendation to propose non-renewal of the term contract employees holding those positions of coordinator, special education, to include Tammy Brown, Kathy Burleson, Ashley James, Dominion Southall, Tresha Hatter, Sharon Moore, and Rashidi Younger at the end of the contract term, and authorize the superintendent to notify the affected employees in accordance with applicable laws and district policies.
Second.
A motion by Ms. Hollinger and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
I move to accept the superintendent's recommendation to propose non-renewals of term contract employees holding the position of facilitator, special education, to include the following: Gwendolyn Chenier, Cheryl O'Connor, Thelma Arthur, Sharith Butters, Cheryl Little, Yvonne Fields, Mildred Jenkins Williams, Rachel Kent, Diane Jacobs, Brenda Morgan, and Kathy Schaefer at the end of the contract term, and authorize the superintendent to know the affected employees in accordance with applicable laws and district policies.
Second.
A motion by Ms. Hollinger and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Ms. Hollinger?
Yes, I move to accept the superintendent's recommendation to propose non-renewal of term contract employees holding the positions of facilitator, behavior, special education, to include Eric Powers and Darren Quintero at the end of the contract term, and authorize the superintendent to notify the affected employees in accordance with applicable laws and district policies.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Hollinger and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
I move to accept the superintendent's recommendation to propose non-renewals of term contract employees holding the positions of teacher, special education bank, to include Shirley Foster, John Salzman, Debbie Jabia, Alexandra Needler, Felicia Arnick, Stephanie Hodge, Lashika Allen, and Kathleen McNeil Murch at the end of the contract term, and authorize the superintendent to notify the affected employees in accordance with applicable laws and district policy.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Hollinger and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
I move to accept the superintendent's recommendation to propose non-renewal of term contract employees holding the position of teacher, employment specialist, special education, to include Sarah Weems, Shakitha Mickle, and Tawana Aldridge at the end of the contract term, and authorize the superintendent to notify the affected employees in accordance with applicable laws and district policy.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Hollinger and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Ms. Hollinger?
I move to conduct any hearings concerning the proposed non-renewals of term contract employees holding the positions of coordinator, special education facilitator, behavior special education, teacher special education VEC, and teacher employment specialist, special education, in accordance with applicable laws and district policy DFBB local, in the manner of hearings before an independent hearing examiner.
Second.
A motion by Ms. Hellinger and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
And lastly, I move to terminate the probationary contracts for employees Christy Henderson and Caroline Faison, who hold the positions of coordinator special education at the end of the contractual period, and authorize the superintendent to notify the affected employees in accordance with applicable laws and district policy.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Hellinger and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. I believe that is all of the action we have on closed session items. So we'll move on to our action items for tonight. And that, stack paper on the ground. This has to do with the board self-evaluation. We have that scheduled for 2 weeks from now. And in conjunction with the, well, I guess we better have a motion first, so let's start with that.
Madam President, I move to approve the action item as presented.
Second. The motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mr. George. Excuse me. I must have swallowed my nuts wrong. We have revised a couple of the items on the board self-evaluation from our discussion on March 21st, just using some terminology a little bit differently. So I took the liberty of going ahead and revising those 3 items there, and have distributed them for your review. Does anybody have any questions or discussion? All right. Why are you looking at me like that? Is that because you're so proud of me?
I am proud of you.
Thank you, Mr. Rice, and I'll just spring this part on you. So I also took the liberty of putting together a little Survey Monkey. This is going to come to you in the form of a Survey Monkey tomorrow, but I also put together a Survey Monkey, or the staff helped me to do that, regarding the leadership competencies. And we, according to this evaluation on the first page, it says the leadership competencies will be self-evaluated on an individual basis. We didn't have a good mechanism for doing that last year. So I put together a Survey Monkey to allow all the trustees to, and I don't think we have a slide of it to put up there, but basically to kind of do a 360 of the leadership competencies amongst our the 7 of us. So with your permission, that'll go out on tomorrow also, and we won't necessarily discuss any individual's results in our evaluation, but they'll just be for you to look at and review as you wish. All right, so we have a motion on the table. Do we have any more discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Now we have review items, and our first review section is for the schematic designs of the classroom enclosure project of Dulles Elementary. Dr. Dupree?
Yes, Executive Director of Design and Construction, Oscar Perez, along with our architects for this project, Architectnics 3, are prepared to do a brief overview of the design for this remodel.
Thank you very much, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Dupree. What we're bringing to you tonight is the schematic design conceptual for the Dulles Elementary School, and I believe you all are all aware that Dulles Elementary School does not have a full enclosure on the walls. It's an open concept school, and so what we're proposing is to come in here and actually, close this building up, put in, wall partitions. At the same time, we're also, as we're trying to do in every project that we bring forth, is to go ahead and include some 21st century concepts. So we're looking at adding a flex space and then also an instructional pull-out space within the building. One of the things also that, we came to y'all and hired Architectnics 3 with a proposed budget of $1,500,000. But as we got into the project, we realized that in the closing of the walls and the present design of the MEP for the facility, it was going to take a lot more to be able to get this accomplished. So we're coming to you tonight. We have from Architectnics 3, we have Chris Powell with us. We have Brittany Dees, and then we also have Calvin Dees. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to Calvin so he can go ahead and go through the presentation, and then we'll be able to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Dees, it's going to be important that you use your microphone so we can record this so the public can view it. So if you can hold on to that.
Yes, please.
Or we can,
Handheld.
oh, we've got a handheld one for you, Mr. Pham. I'm having technical difficulties.
I'd like to say good afternoon to the board, Dr. Dupree. This afternoon, we're going to present our proposed schematic for, like Mr. Perez indicated, the enclosure, classroom enclosure for Dulles Elementary School. If you know, modern design now is beyond the little red classroom. Everyone now is going into technology. And we're going to show that the Dulles School is a renovation, but we can incorporate the modern design. Next slide, please. This is the existing typical classroom right now as Dulles exists. If you can see here, there was glazing put in an effort to try to get borrowed light. It doesn't work. Yes. Okay, I'm sorry. It doesn't work. So the proposal is we're going to demolish the glazing and the existing walls in order to make an effort to go in and enclose those classrooms. Okay, next slide. This will be the results of that renovation for a typical classroom. We'll have extended walls to the ceiling to increase the acoustical value of the classrooms. Right now, the teachers complain that all of the sound travels over the open space. So we're going to enclose. Now, we'll have new consolidated millwork. Right now, the millwork in the existing classrooms is sort of spread out over the whole classroom. So we're going to consolidate to give the teacher a wardrobe unit, storage above, open storage, and then lower drawer storage, and that will bring all of the millwork together. We're going to have finished carpet. The carpet that we're proposing is this print that we've met with Ms. Griffin on and approved. She's in agreement with this type of carpet that we're going to place. These walls will be pre-finished with a system, a pre-engineered system, where the walls will come out already fabricated with panels, and all they would do is get erected. There will be no on-site building. Next slide. This is the existing auditorium and cafeteria area. Right now, they have an open space which will not allow them to have dual activity. We're going to propose a motorized acoustical door panel into place of this roll-up curtain. That way, Ms. Griffin will be allowed to have dual activity. It can have two functions at one time. Next slide. This is the location of that proposed motorized roll-up divider door in the cafeteria. So that will give them a dual area to function on this area right here. Next slide. This is a graphic rendering of that motorized panel. It's going to be from floor to ceiling. That way we'll have the divided spaces, and also it would be allow them to open it up for a more broader activity and then a divided activity. Next slide. As Mr. Perez says, we want to try to incorporate some 21st century design. This is a proposed space that's open and vacant at the west quarter of the school, which is going to allow us to be able to incorporate this flex space. That flex space is in the first grade area, while Ms. Griffin is intended to be able to bring in small groups of classrooms, students, to be able to have more direct instructional, and then rotate those kids out. Next slide. This will be the results of that renovation. We're proposing some accent walls to create a colorful atmosphere. This is an existing concrete structure that's in place. The existing Dulles School is a precast building. So we're going to leave that structure in place and then just try to accent that area. We're going to bring in proposed strip lighting to give this atmosphere a little bit more brightness, and then this will be group furniture that Ms. Griffin is intending to use for this space. And the colorful carpet is what we intend to use here to brighten up that space. Next slide. This is another space that we intend to use as a instructional pull-out space. This space will be utilized also as a space that Ms. Griffin can bring in specialized instructional for smaller groups of children. Let's look at the results. Next slide. This will be the results of that space with new furniture for learning, group learning. This wall is already existing and refinished, and this wall will be a new wall refinished. This is the material that we're proposing to use, which will come out completely finished. And those walls will be erected from the delivery truck into that space. This will be a colorful accent wall. Then we'll have a lay-in acoustical ceiling with down lights, track lights that will be allow her to do display in this area. Next slide. This is that location right now in the classroom. This is the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade area A that we're going to renovate. These will be the classrooms that we'll renovate, and they'll become the typical classroom. This is that instructional pull-out space that I mentioned earlier. Next slide. We didn't have the last slide for the typical? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dees.
Thank
That
you.
was very informative. Do we have any questions from the board or?
I don't have a question, but it looks like some of those bright colors will liven up that space and improve, from the photographs, it looks pretty dim and kind of dull in there.
Thank you,
So,
Trustee Rice. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
It will be bright.
All right, Ms. Hollinger?
Just a quick question. Mr. Perez, you were discussing the $500,000. Could you just kind of explain to me the difference that we're referring to now?
Originally, when we came to the board and hired Architects 3, we proposed a budget of $1,500,000. And what we're proposing to get approval on is a total of 2.2 construction, and then 110 in contingency.
Okay.
So just as a clarification, when we vote on this item next week, we'll be voting on the project budget at that time, and that's what's proposed there on page 103 of our board book.
That is
Is that-
correct.
Is that correct? So just for clarification for the trustees. Mr. George?
Yeah, I just have, I'm talking about the flex space.
Yes, sir.
You, on your finished picture, one side you said there is a wall, existing wall is going to be there. That cannot be painted some bright color?
It is a complete existing finish wall that possibly could be painted, Mr. George. But right now, we are intending to stand that wall up, okay, in order to close off the mezzanine area where you're looking down in the classrooms, right? But that is a possibility, and we can look into that.
To me, I always like colors.
Yes.
You know, like, so small children love
Right.
colors. So if that's a dull wall,
We will take that under consideration. right?
okay. And also, I just wanted to add here, I heard so many people, in general, so many parents from Dallas Elementary School, they've been always concerned and complaining and all that stuff. This hopefully address their concern, the noise problem and all
Yes.
that stuff, so.
And that is the goal, to
So you're
provide
confident it is
yes.
going to be completely addressed?
acoustically sound.
Thank you,
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. George. Do we have other comments or questions? All right, well, thank you very much.
No,
Thank
thank
you
you,
for
Board.
being here tonight.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, our next item is a memorandum of understanding. We have only one tonight, and that is with HS Texas PLLC, which is the school vaccinations initiative. I think we might have talked about this before. We were just waiting on a name change for that item. Do we have any discussion? All right. I'll make sure everyone's paying attention. Any questions? Okay, moving on then to hazardous traffic conditions. Mr. Brassfield, do you have any initial comments, or would you like me to make some comments? I had sent in a note earlier today about a couple of things that were missing off the list.
Yes, ma'am. Of those items, they're actually generally listed, they're just not specific by neighborhood. So when they had named the lakes, let's see, which page are we on here?
It's there, it should
Okay.
be there
Oh,
in.
where it says Clements? Yes, Meadow Lakes is part of that group.
Okay,
They just said the lake subdivision, so they didn't really specify. And we just pulled up the old records from the last time. So we really didn't have make any changes. We're just going to add that to the list. It's just 107? Yes, page 107.
yeah, so I think the First Colony in general considers that two separate neighborhoods, so that's why I mentioned it. And I guess the same would apply in the Colony Meadows
Yes, ma'am.
listing as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
And those are just additions. It doesn't affect the routing at all. So the buses are still running in those areas. It's just a matter of making sure we identify the areas so that when we do submit for the 10% additional funding, that it's available. Of course, we're way over the 10%.
right.
So it is included in that area. Now, you did point out one piece.
Oh,
that-
Mike, I'm wondering, before you move on from there, you've specifically addressed the Lakes subdivision. Could you not just say north of Highway 59,
We could say just north of Highway
rather than
50.
list multiple neighborhoods?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's the kind of thing we need to get edited.
Right. Okay, yes.
That would be simpler, I guess, then we wouldn't.
I have a question on page 105. It's about Sullivan Elementary.
Yes, sir.
It says 2016-17 hazardous condition areas east of LJ Parkway and south of Hagerson Road. I cannot understand where it is. I live in that area because, see, LJ Parkway actually travel east to west. And Hagerson, as far as I understand, it goes north to west. Sorry, north
North-south.
south. So what area you're mentioning there?
I wish I had a graph to show you. It's actually on the north side of LJ Parkway.
Okay.
But in the district, because the district is slanted, it's more east of where the campus is. It's east of the campus, well, kind of northeast of the campus.
Okay.
And
So is that the all north side of LJ Parkway is considered as hazardous?
yes, sir, all of the north side of LJ Parkway.
So
So any
it-
students having to cross LJ Parkway would be considered hazardous.
So is that possible they are going to get transportation? Is that
Yes,
what
sir.
you're saying?
That's what we're submitting.
Okay. Is that a temporary arrangement, or is that where it's going to be? LJ Parkway is not going to go anywhere. It's going to be there.
We're proposing, when you approve this, hopefully next week, that will be a permanent situation.
Sure. And I feel that is a good recommendation. I don't have any children going, so. But LJ Parkway is a very active road. I see hundreds and hundreds of cars pass by, and some places they don't even have a stop sign. So I appreciate your recommendation in that area, and I'm sure there's a lot of parents appreciate that as well.
And with those subdivisions building, it's just gonna add more traffic into that area,
Sure,
more cars.
exactly.
So that's one of the considerations.
I'm actually north of LJ Parkway. I wish I had somebody to send it to Sullivan, so I don't know how to drop them. Thank you.
And specifically, this proposal was to just incorporate Sullivan's hazardous proposed areas into the general adoption of all of the designated hazardous areas. So all of the areas, there's about,
But we normally revise them, or we look at this year to year if there's changes, so this is a
correct.
change. And those other things are not necessarily a change, they're just a clarification.
More of a definition.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that the situation Mr. George describes when you talk about being east of LJ Parkway, it's the same thing. One would think that Highway 59 runs north and south, and so you would actually be talking about the area west of 59. But I guess that is in the same descriptor as how you've got the district oriented.
Yes, we argued several times
It is pretty
about if
confusing,
this
so
is
it's not
east,
actually, you
north,
can't
or-
actually look at a map and say,
This afternoon, I was thinking 30 minutes to figure out where is this place. You mentioned it, I get it.
yeah. So
So
Okay.
All
Would
right.
it help at all to just have the map outlined?
I think, or you say north, you just mentioned north of LJ Parkway, it's basin.
yeah, well, I guess he's done it all. They've organized this all in one way, so just to keep it up, it's just a little confusing on the nomenclature. So, then the other thing I think I mentioned, I might have sent in today, was about Lakeview Elementary.
That is correct. That should not even be there because after the feeder patterns were changed, we don't have any students south of LJ Park, of Highway 90 going to Lakeview. You're correct.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions on this one? All right, well, thank you very much, Mr. Brassfield.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to the donations over $10,000. We have a couple of very industrious PTOs. Any questions about this? Just our normal thing, Ms. Hellinger?
Yeah, I do have a question. This came up, I think, over the last 2 weeks about the marquees. I'm not sure who I'm addressing this question to. Okay.
I'll take a shot at it.
All right, thanks. I know we're also redoing our marquees as well. So I just want to make some clarification. How different are these marquees going to be from the ones that we're doing? That we
No,
have on our list?
we're putting together a standard. Okay, the ones that are being funded like this, they're getting them quicker, but we are trying to do something where we are setting up a schedule that addresses every campus that has a shortcoming.
So when I see this marquee versus one of the ones that we're putting, like, for example, at Lake Olympia, I shouldn't see a vast difference in the marquee, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, all right, yeah, thanks.
All right. Moving on to the next item then is a budget amendment for the electrical upgrades that are in the purchasing section. Do we have any questions about this one, Mr. Rice?
Yes, what, are we replacing all the switchgear? What's going on there at Dulles?
In terms of the electrical, I mean, I'll need to get, on the specifics of that, we'll have to get Oscar to respond.
So this, Mr. Rice, sorry to interrupt you, this is about the particular budget amendment, and then the purchase of it is in the purchasing section, which is coming up in just a minute, and we can.
Okay, I'll defer till then.
Because I think other people might have questions about the actual project as well. Thank you, sir. Do we have any questions about the budget amendment process?
I do need to make a note of something. So whenever we were putting this together, when we were thinking about this project as well as the enclosure, we talked about the use of major maintenance funds, because we're talking about, some massive projects that weren't completely covered in either the 2007 bond or the 2014 bond. And so what we learned, though, this past Friday, that some of the numbers are better than what we expected in the Madden Elementary and then also Middle School 15. So there's the possibility of potentially using some of our 2007 contingency, on these as opposed to using the general maintenance. And so I want to look at that again before we bring the final item on Monday. Okay, so we got that good news on Friday, and so I'm just trying to make sure, because again, I want to spend 2007 down as quickly as possible on applicable projects. So
But this item isn't including the enclosure project. so-
this one is not, but it was our intent that it would initially, and that's an oversight on my part.
Okay, so this item is going to have a redo
Yeah,
by
because
next
if you look
week?
at the language on the earlier item, it does mention that
No.
no, it doesn't. Okay, I'm sorry, I misspoke.
No, because the enclosure is going to be a CSP that will
Right.
not come
Oh.
back until May, and so we were going to bring the budget amendment
That's
in
right.
May in tandem with that.
Okay.
Okay, so that's fine. So we could, if there was what my point was, if you're bringing another, we could leave this the same, and then we could do another, you could make your adjustments based on what you're bringing to us in May. That would work.
We can do that, but I do want to look at this because I would rather spend 2007 money in total if there is enough. So I just want to take a look first. So I just want to take a look at that. But it's really just a matter of the funding and where it comes from, and it certainly requires board approval for us to spend anything that's committed like this, and then also if we were going to do contingency.
But didn't I understand that the enclosure was going to be worked on and completed first, then the electrical upgrades were going to take a little bit longer time?
I think it certainly could be, but we won't have the CSP for a little while. But if I could do both in 2007, I'd like to.
Okay,
And so that's what we're going to take a look at.
all right, great. Well, we'll look forward to more information then next week.
Okay.
Okay, next is the purchasing items. The first one is the Avid College Readiness System. Do we have discussion on this? All right, Mr. George?
So currently, I see that we have 12 campuses, Avid campuses. I think my question is towards Dr. Hill, maybe. So I hear a lot of traveling around different school districts. I hear a lot of good thing about Avid programs. Some of these school districts are 100% Avid campuses. And of course, I understand there are money involved in that, so we have to be careful when we make decisions on it. Would you consider, at least secondary level, making all our campuses Avid campuses? Or do you see benefit in it?
I do see benefit in it. I think that there is a priority, and the needs are different at different campuses. Typically, one of the purposes of Avid is to reach first-generation college-going students and to encourage students who have demonstrated capacity to reach out and take more rigorous coursework that they might not take without the support of study time management, organizational skills, and Avid provides that. And some of our students need that support in some schools more than others, but I certainly think that it is something that all schools would benefit from. And we're seeking to extend and expand Avid in phases, and this is an expansion phase.
So you're recommending more campuses means to me is that you're seeing clearly benefits.
Yes, sir. We do see benefits. We see increased students taking pre-AP and AP coursework and seeking college admission at some of our higher need schools.
Sure. Do we have any statistics showing that before Avid and after, or is this very early to talk about?
Yes, sir, we do, and we can bring that back to you in a board update or in the meeting next week, if you would like
I
to
really
hear
like
more
to see
about
that because I hear a lot of good thing about it, and I'm glad we are embracing it and we are even improving more campuses, including more campuses in it so that our children have access to this program for their, success for the future. About college and beyond. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. George. Ms. Hollinger, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I just would like to say that I'm excited about the program, and I think this also lends to our ability, our mantra of really setting up high expectations of all of our children. This gives them the ability to reach that. So, thank you.
Yes, ma'am, I agree. I think it's a great program. So just adding to something Mr. George said, if we were looking at results, I know you have given us some information, maybe in a previous memo or something, but I wondered, do we have students that are actually, we know that they're admitted to college, but do we know if they're actually attending, and do we have any data or information on if they're graduating or anything? And we don't need to talk, you could maybe gather that or see if there is any information about that. I'm just curious looking, because those are really the outcomes we want to get to, right? That the kids are actually ready to take that next step.
We
Yes.
do get some clearinghouse information, and we'll see if we can filter some of that out to give you some specifics.
Okay, that would be great. And I had one other question related to this, and I'm a big fan of Avid as well. I think it serves a great purpose. I just wondered, as we're expanding to these other 6 or 7 campuses, 6 campuses, do we have our, what's the viewpoint of the principals of those campuses on this program? Is this something they're looking forward to? How have you worked with them on that?
Yes, ma'am. Steve Shields and his team have met with the principals prior to bringing this recommendation forward, and they do see benefit in it, the principals do.
Okay, because that's obviously key to any new program. We don't want it to be just one more thing to do. We want them to be excited about having the program on their campus, and that's really how it'll benefit the students.
Important you mentioned that, and I'm glad you mentioned, because any program is only as good as who is implementing it, and their passion for it. And I'm glad Madam President brought up that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. George. All right, any other questions or comments on this item? All right, then let's move on to the next one, is the clinic supplies and equipment and related items. We have questions on this? All right, do we have questions on the next one, the photography services for the bond construction projects? Any questions? All right, moving on to the delinquent account collections. Another one of those enterprise funds events. Any questions on this? All right, commercial printing services. Questions on this one? All right. The data center renovation.
Yes, I have a question.
Mr. Rice.
So, Mr. Pham, who is managing the general contractor on that? Was there an architect or engineer involved in this work?
Yes, sir. We're going to be having PBK to manage the project.
Okay, so did they have to do any design, or who, have they done design already?
PBK and Jojo to take the answer on that.
Yes, PBK did the design work on this. In fact, we have Brian Hood from PBK here today with us.
Okay. That's all right. I just wanted to know how that was being handled. Thank you.
I have a question on that one. The procurement came through, I don't know where I'm looking. The procurement came through to be kind of a tie at the end, it looked like. So do we have, Mr. Fazakerly, how was the decision made to go forward with this firm?
Yes, Mrs. James. We brought the two vendors, McDonald and Evolve, in for interviews and questions. There were 16 very detailed questions that the committee formed in the interview. The scoring was still very close in the interview, but McDonald came out on top after the interview process. I can share that scoring with you if you'd like me to send that to you tomorrow. But it was a 1.83 point differential between the two vendors.
All right, well, that would be, I think that would be good. Thank you for sharing that. So there was a second round there of review. Thank you. Do we have any other questions on this item? I'm glad we're going to make it to tier 2, and I hope for more tiers in our future. Yeah, and you guys over there, you're hoping, we should all be hoping for that, right? You don't know how precarious this is. Okay, so moving forward then, our next item is the lawn, well, no, I skipped this, excuse me, I skipped the electrical upgrades. Mr. Rice, I believe you had some questions.
Yes, Mr. Perez, so am I to understand that the Dulles Elementary, Middle, and High School complex, originally designed, included primary electric service, which Fort Bend ISD owned?
That is correct, sir.
And so now we have a contract with Pfeiffer and Sons and CenterPoint Energy to upgrade that primary service, and then are we deeding that back to CenterPoint or entering into a long-term maintenance agreement for them to maintain the primary service?
No, sir. CenterPoint would own it. We're deeding it back to them, so we're basically getting out of the primary business.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Do we have additional questions on this one? Do we have a project manager for this, Mr. Perez?
Yes, we do, and it's one of our new employees, Camilla, if you would stand up, please. Camilla is our project coordinator for the district that was hired in December, and she's running this project.
All right, excellent. Do we have any other questions on this one? All right, very well. Our next one is the lawn maintenance and landscaping services. We're spending a lot of money on this. That was just an editorial comment. And when we go from what we spent last year to what we're going to spend this year, it seems like a lot. Mr. Burdine?
That's what I was curious about. So I know that we've almost doubled the amount of times that the yards are mowed, I believe, from the previous year until this year. I assume that it's just not cutting it. Is that the deal here?
Was that a pun, Mr. Levine? If, Mrs. Kaiser, if you could switch it to the next page, it shows the comparison, thank you.
Right.
Mr. Basham, would you like to?
Dr. Dupree. In fiscal year 2014-15, we had a single vendor. And as you know, that was not working out very well. They were the low vendor. In fact, the next two highest single vendors were well in excess of $1 million at the time. So the district opted to go to a 3-vendor option and divide the district up between the 3 vendors. They came in at what was actually market price. What has happened that has caused the increase yet again is that our single vendor from the previous year contacted me at the beginning of February and said because of his rising business costs and such things as insurance and things like that, he could no longer remain solvent. And so he asked to be excluded from the contract. Our current contract allows us to utilize our 2 existing vendors and add or subtract as necessary. So we took the central zone and we divided it up logically based on the east zone and west zone vendors and asked them to price out at their pricing. Our projected increase, because each vendor gave us 3 different pricing, our projected increase for the contract put us $150,000 over the budget that we had set for this year. Because it happened with 1 month's notice and at the peak of the growing season coming on, administration deemed it expedient to have a continuance of mowing so that we don't have any lapse in service. So we took that option to increase our 2 existing vendors and assign those sites. Realizing that this may not be the best economically for the district in the next fiscal year, we're going back in June, probably out to RFP. Although there are 4 remaining renewal options, we're going to analyze the data, and it may be in our best interest to go back out to RFP so that we have the 3-vendor option. I would just like to say that it's been optimal this year compared to the single vendor where we were receiving weekly, if not daily, complaints of the mowing. Our 3-vendor option has really been working out good this year. We've increased the service to the district. Once we got past the start with the 3 vendors where we found spots that weren't being mowed, it has worked quite well. The unexpected departure of our central zone vendor has led us to this decision, but we recommend that we move ahead with this because we are very proud of our facilities and we want to maintain our public-facing facilities.
Thank you, Mr. Basham. I think you're right.
I appreciate that because I'd mentioned before when someone comes to work every morning, they want to feel proud of where they work. I think this is an important part of it. So when I was reading this earlier today, in other words, the contractor that underbid it is, were they even anywhere comparable to the other contractors as far as per job or?
Actually, I'll just say that the other 2 vendors have been doing an exceptional job, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate your hard work.
All right, do we have any other comments on this? Ms.
No,
Gallagher?
I would just add, I agree, because I remember that vote when I first came on the board. And I personally have not seen the same issues that we did before, so I do appreciate the efforts with the 3 contractors. So I would definitely like to see us get this resolved where we don't find ourselves in a similar situation again. Understanding that based on what you're telling me, the quality has definitely changed, but based on the new quantity, I don't want us to find ourselves in a similar situation that we have in the past.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Basham. I think that helps us. All right, that concludes our purchasing items. So next, we have the minutes from the previous month and February 29th, since that was the last day of February. Do you have any questions or corrections to any of these? If you have some corrections, you can email them to Mrs. Kaiser and she'll fix them. Do we have any audience response? Do we have any audience items? Mrs. Porter, no one submitted ahead of time?
No, we don't.
All right, and we seem to have run out of audience except for employees, so.
Can I make one comment before we adjourn?
Yes, Mr. Rosenthal.
I'd like to compliment Mr. Spears on his choice of socks tonight. Very nice.
We have an over-under on that, and, no. So, Ms. Hallinger, your cue.
I move to adjourn this meeting.
All those in favor, say aye. Meeting adjourned.